Oh, Mac.
His roots were humble.
I grew up here in a little lemon ranch. It's the poorest lemon ranch in California.
His ambitions huge.
We are gonna win this time. I can feel it.
People are beginning to acknowledge that Nixon could have been, probably was one of the great presidents, but a deeply flawed man.
I will not go down as the first American president to lose a war.
How much more is it going to cost? When do the rest of us stop paying off your debts?
This is Nixon's finish.
It's the old thing about power corrupting. You're in a situation where you can get away with murder.
Dead kids, how the hell do we ever give the Democrats a weapon like this? I mean, if Cambodia doesn't work, we'll bomb Hanoi if we have to. Yeah, and that's right. If necessary, I'll drop the big one.
Triumphant in victory. Bitter in defeat.
It's your fault, Henry. It's your people who are talking to the press.
He changed the world.
I love that man. I love him.
Lost a nation.
There's a cancer on the presidency, and it's growing.
And paid the price of power.
The very tools that made him president were the tools that destroyed him.
He got the Constitution hanging by a thread because he went to Whittier and not to Yale.
You're not threatening me, are you?
Presidents don't threaten. They don't have to.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself.
Think twice before he leaks again, won't he?
Yeah. Be looking in his toilet bowl every time he pulls the chain.
From Synergy comes Oliver Stone's new feature film, Nixon. Academy Award winner Sir Anthony Hopkins stars as the 37th President of the United States, Richard Milhous Nixon, who reached the White House through sheer guts and determination, only to become perhaps the most tragic figure in American history.
Nixon, of course, is the American patron saint of darkness. He was a dark and glum man, it seemed to me. His interior life was glum. Gloomy Gus, they called him as a kid. That was his nickname in school.
What's Nixon doing here?
He thinks he can make it. He was a bad football player, but he stayed on the team for 4 years. I mean, the guy had tenacity. It's one thing he had. He never gave up.
He went from congressman to senator to vice president in his 30s. I think he was 39 when he was on the ticket to be vice president of the United States.
Nixon is a shifty-eyed liar. If he had to stick to the truth, then he'd have very little to say. If you vote for Nixon, then you ought to go to hell. Harry S. Truman. That's what killed his dick.
He had the loser image coming against Jack Kennedy. He did not look attractive on television, as attractive as Kennedy did. So when Kennedy came along, he said, okay, I lost that bastard. He stole the election. He beat me unfairly, but I'm going to play the cornball image, and he did.
All in all, I've given as good as I've taken. But as I leave you, I want you to know, just think what you're going to be missing. You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
The desire to be right. The desire to prove himself to mother and father. The desire to rise above his own class. Those were the very qualities that in a sense destroyed him too, because it made him paranoid and untrustworthy and cynical about the business of politics and the way we run this country.
To become the President of the United States of America from Yorba Linda, Whittier, little town in California, that's not a little guy. That's a man driven by some great passion, some great vision.
When a nation that has been known for a century for equality of opportunity is torn by unprecedented racial violence, when the President of the United States cannot travel abroad or to any major city at home without fear of a hostile demonstration, then it is time for new leadership for the United States of America.
He rode the anti-communism vehicle to the presidency. Everyone has to have a cause. That was his cause that made him highly visible at a time when it behooved him to be visible.
If we sneak out of this war, another will start a mile down the road. We bite the bullet here in Cambodia. There. We bomb the hell out of these people.
I feel that he came into power, wanting to end the war. That was his ticket. And he had to deliver. The war it dragged on. If he had ended the war in 1 year, he would have been a hero. He would have been a hero. But he blew it because it dragged out. It was almost his indecision, his constant almost Lyndon Johnson-like, going back and forth. Should I bomb? Shouldn't I bomb? I have to be tough. Took a position against the students, which was a mistake. And he started to divide the country.
Maybe Nixon couldn't have pulled out. He inherited the war from a previous government. He said, you know, if you inherit the war and you keep it long enough, it'll be your war.
Because I understand the system. I believe I can control it. Maybe not control it totally, but tame it enough to make it do some good.
Sounds like you're talking about a wild animal.
Or maybe I am.
He couldn't understand why the kids outside were protesting about the Vietnam War. He was an old-fashioned American, said, you know, we gotta fight communism. The very man who opened up the communist countries like China and Russia.
In one stroke, the balance of power has shifted to our favor.
He was a brilliant diplomat, politician, yes, even statesman, and did a lot to diffuse Russia's power in the Cold War, for example. And in some ways, he was horrible and a smearmeister and corrupt and a liar. The Watergate burglary was, in fact, a third-rate burglary, where they looked through some files.
I never had anything to do with that, and I resent the implication that
Send it all you want, Henry. But you're in with the rest of us. Cambodia, Ellsberg, the wiretaps you put in. The president wants you to know you can't just click your heels and head back to Harvard Yard. It's your ass too, Henry.
I run into people all the time and say, what did he ever do? What's this all about? A little break-in. It isn't about the break-in. You know, the break-in led to the expose of all these other crimes, and they were, in fact, crimes.
I still don't think we can contain this anymore. There's a cancer on the presidency, and it's growing.
You can find anything from that John Dean was a sacrificial lamb to that John Dean was absolutely responsible for the entire cover-up.
The committee will come to order.
It was quite clear that the cover-up, as far as the White House was concerned, was going to continue.
You were either part of the group that blew the whistle, or you remained loyal and went down with the ship.
You do know that we're next, don't you?
I think there were men with strong ideals and strong beliefs and hopes, but the dominating character in any White House is always the president.
I think the men who serve the president generally are the same class through history. Roman times, or British times, or American times. I think that people in devotion to their leader will often break the law, and I think that they were no different in that sense. They were young men, idealistic, ideological, and in serving their president, they crossed the line.
What's Liddy got?
Apparently he was using some campaign cash that was laundered for us through Mexico. The FBI's onto it. We could have a problem with that. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but I do believe that Haldeman really was not in his being a criminal personality. Yeah, if Liddy takes the rap for Watergate, we can take care of him, and that lets us off the hook.
I don't have time for all that. Just handle it, Bob. Keep it out of the White House.
He was so busy solving every problem of the Nixon presidency, it never dawned on him that he was on a ship that was headed away from the shores of the Constitution and into the murky waters of obstruction of justice and corruption and, you know, the devastation of a government.
Sir, do you intend to cooperate with Senator Ervin's committee?
Will you agree to the appointment of a special prosecutor, President?
Mr. President!
There we clearly had a guy who degenerated in office.
And the longest war in American history, they keep harping on this chicken shit.
On the one hand, you have this supreme rationalization for anything you do, which is you're saving freedom and the world and democracy. On the other hand, you're a disintegrating individual who increasingly feels you're surrounded by enemies.
You know who's behind this, don't you? Teddy Kennedy. Yeah, he drowns abroad in his car, and he can't run for president.
He said, yes, I'm responsible, and I'm sorry that I caused this country great grief, but the fact is that he is responsible, and he never really admitted it, and he never really understood where that responsibility came in.
When they look at you, they see what they want to be. When they look at me, they see what they are.
The films of Academy Award-winning writer and director Oliver Stone have consistently reflected the intense personal stories of individuals caught up in the turbulent times of the 60s and 70s. With Nixon, Stone has taken on the challenge of capturing the essence of the man, while being true to the real-life people and events that have shaped our nation into its modern form.
I was determined that we should get to the bottom of Watergate, and the truth should be fully brought out, no matter who was involved.
It seemed 20 years had gone by since Watergate, and now is the time, almost like with Vietnam, to take a second look or a third look. At the same time, it has a cross-application to my Vietnam pictures because they're all part of that time and that place. That, in a sense, I'm looking at that social history.
Yes, there are divisions in this country.
That's because you created them.
You know, young man, who a great hero is? Abraham Lincoln. He brought this country together.
I think Oliver takes that period as a way of looking at the rest of American society. Oliver is a guy who's interested in ego and greed and betrayal, loyalty, patriotism, universal themes. It applies to today's politics, the landscape, very succinctly because he is the founding father of modern republicanism. We researched it with tapes, the Watergate tapes, among other things, the histories of Nixon, the biographies.
Nixon and Khrushchev. These are the historic, almost unprecedented scenes from the American National Exhibition in Moscow.
We also looked at literally dozens of hours of footage on Nixon and his own interviews, his own words, his own books. He was one of the most documented men of our time.
All that I can say from the way you talk and the way you dominate the conversation, you would have made a good lawyer yourself.
We talked to many of his people who worked around him. John Dean was with us. Alex Butterfield was on the set every day as a pure technical advisor. He was next to Haldeman, as close to Nixon as you can get in the working environment.
First, I went over the whole script, and I wrote comments about the script. I decided at the outset that I would not let one thing go by. The most minor discrepancy, in my view, I called him on.
The furniture, the recreation of the Oval Office, the recreation of some of the rooms around the Oval Office and in the West Wing, they're truly remarkable in the detail. I really was sort of transported back in time and almost was disoriented because it seemed like I was back 20 years ago in the White House.
The filmmakers realized early on that even with exacting attention to detail, audiences would be focusing on the actors portraying these icons of American political history. The strong supporting cast includes Joan Allen as Pat Nixon, Powers Booth as General Alexander Haig, Ed Harris as Watergate burglar E. Howard Hunt, Bob Hoskins as FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, E.G. Marshall as Attorney General John Mitchell, David Paymer as White House Press Secretary Ron Ziegler, David Hyde Pierce as White House Counsel John Dean, Paul Savino as Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Academy Award winner Mary Steenburgen as Richard Nixon's mother Hannah Nixon, J.T. Walsh as Domestic Affairs Advisor John Ehrlichman, and James Woods as Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman. But it is the tour de force performance of Sir Anthony Hopkins in the title role that drives the story of Nixon.
Without risk, there's no heroism, there's no history. Nixon was born to do this. Give history a nudge.
This movie is called Nixon because Tony Hopkins is pretty much in every scene, and the movie is constructed around him.
Ellsberg is not the issue. Pentagon Papers aren't the issue. It's the lie.
After the initial madness of accepting the part, I went through some moments of real panic. But I watched a lot of movies, a lot of interviews with Nixon, the Frost interviews. And what I tried to take from Nixon's demeanor is what I perceived to be the inner struggle of the man. I know I'm not a photographic representation of Nixon, but what they've done has enabled me to feel a little bit like him. He's a very closed man, but he reveals a great deal through his body movements. Wasn't at ease with himself. In fact, didn't like himself at all. Didn't feel worthy of the presidency. And to the strong man, the ideal American man, you've got to be strong. And I think that's what Nixon's problem was.
Excuse me, Mr. President. Hopkins captures just how awkward a person he was. He was physically awkward in the presence of other people. At least That was my impression. And so, as you know, you came forward, he would back up, and he was always sort of looking and so forth. And then he'd have that crazy smile and grin that Hopkins captures brilliantly in this movie. I mean, absolutely brilliant. That maniacal grin at just the weirdest moments.
I need a few more dancers down on this.
The roles were written, I think, in a way that was attractive enough to interest actors like Joan Allen and Sorvino and Woods.
You should be proud, because they'll never trust you, sir. Because we speak for the average American.
First, he didn't think I was right for it. He said, he's a much more contained guy than you are. And I said, well, it's the old joke, it's acting. And he said, good enough. He said, if you think you can do it, let's go.
You stop it.
Jimmy is a wonderful actor to be around. He keeps the set alive. He gave Hopkins a good hard time, which is great,
It took me a long time to fall in love with you, Dick. But I did. If it doesn't make you happy, you want them to love you.
Oh, don't. I'm not checking.
They never will, Dick. No matter how many elections you win, they never will.
Through the performance of Joan Allen, it's extraordinary. She allows you to understand the softer side of Nixon that we don't see, the side that, how was he in private?
I don't think that he consulted her very much in terms of decision-making. I think he wanted to keep her separate from that part of his life. And so I think it was a lonely time for her many, many times. There were demonstrations going on outside the White House on the day that Tricia got married, which was, I'm sure, very difficult for the family. But I think it was one of the few times that they actually danced together in their lives. And I think it must have made Pat very, very happy to have that moment with her husband, because I don't think that she was able to do that very often.
Sir, I'm not going to be the scapegoat for this. Haldeman and Ehrlichman are in it just as deep as I.
And certainly David Hyde Pierce is he's been in movies before, but for me, he's a find. I think he's an extraordinary young actor.
He creates an atmosphere. It's not an unpleasant atmosphere at all, but it is an atmosphere where the inherent tension and sort of darkness of what's going on in the film is just there for you. It's absolutely palpable.
I'm very flexible. I've never, I said, try, okay, you have an idea? Give it to me, show it to me, try me, show me. Let's not talk too much about it, just show me.
And playback. And backward action.
Oliver's not a person who gives you great compliments. He doesn't pat you on the head all the time. In fact, he does the opposite. But he's not brutal. He's not a callous, cruel man. He's challenging. He's provocative.
Sir, Congress is considering 4 articles of impeachment.
The charges are really very serious. One, abuse of power.
People have to make up their own minds. We're not trying to say this is the only way you can look at Richard Nixon. But I think it will give them enough to think about that maybe they'll want to delve into it deeper.
2, obstruction of justice.
Nixon will always be remembered as the only president to ever resign. And people are always going to look at why he resigned. That is going to be a part of that presidency forever.
3, failure to cooperate with the Congress, sir.
I think when you see this movie, you'll come to appreciate that nobody in public office, in public life, is as he or she appears to be. There's always a sadder story and a warmer story.
And last, bombing Cambodia, sir. They can't impeach me for bombing Cambodia. The president can bomb anybody he likes.
I love the talk of the gridiron, the talk of combat, the talk of being in the arena, quoting Teddy Roosevelt. A man, bloodied and unbowed, never a quitter. So although he didn't really have those qualities as physically, he did have them. At the end of his life, he earned those qualities as a warrior. I would classify Richard Nixon as a warrior.
I think he was a tragedy. When I watched I've watched it so many times now, the final walk to the helicopter before he does the famous farewell. I find that so moving and so tragic because I see on his face, my interpretation that's on his face is, what the hell happened? Why have I blown it? I think he blew it because he was tormented by the demons inside him that he couldn't reconcile.
And so we leave with high hopes, and good spirits, and with deep humility. And I say to each and every one of you, not only will we always remember you, but always you will be in our hearts. And you will be in our prayers. And only then will you find what we Quakers call peace at the center.